Yes, I wish somebody would think of the children other than these radical gender ideologues. So you may have been already alerted to this story on Sargon's This Week in Stupid, and Baring also followed up with a video on it and urged people to sign a petition against this madness. And I want to urge you to do the same and shed some more light on this ongoing stupidity from gender ideologues. Preschools focus on non-gendered play to eliminate family violence. Early childhood teachers will be encouraged to intervene in gendered play, identify toys and books that reinforce gender stereotypes, and avoid gender-specific language under a Victorian government plan to tackle family violence through preschools. That's right, you heard that right, preschools. Teachers will also be asked to reflect on their own conscious and unconscious biases, unpack their understanding of gender and gender identity, and avoid using terms such as "good morning, princess" or "boys don't cry." The $3.4 million initiative is part of the Andrews Labor government's $21.8 million Respectful Relationships education package for schools, inspired by the Royal Commission into Family Violence and set to be rolled out to schools over the next 2 years. Now, for those that you don't know, this entire program is based on a set of faulty assumptions. 1. Domestic violence is an epidemic sweeping the nation. It isn't. The Australian Bureau of Statistics says about 1 in 100 women will experience domestic violence in any 12-month period. 2. That domestic violence is a gendered issue that only affects women.
The issue of family violence, or domestic violence as it's often called, which is just violence against women, which is the way I would prefer to describe it.
Obviously, it doesn't. Official Australian statistics show 1 in 4 victims of domestic violence are male, and most research suggests it's considerably more than that. 3. Sexist male attitudes are responsible for domestic violence. Again, most research suggests that sexism is a minor or fringe issue at best. I touched on the risk factors for domestic violence in a previous video. With few exceptions, intimate partner violence risk factors are the same for men and women. There is no mention of sexism or sexist stereotypes, and the main risk factors are demographic risk factors, such as younger age, low income, unemployment, minority group membership. All these programs seek to do is to pathologise natural male behaviour and turn all children into a bunch of androgynous Daleks, all with the backing of the Victorian government, of course. So you won't actually find out much about the program on the Victorian government website, but a few stories have come out in recent days talking about some of the nonsense you can find in this program. Fairy Tales for Kids Under Fire in Respectful Relationships Guide. Fairy tales could be at risk in public schools from moves to degrade the much-loved stories for gender bias. Preschool books and toys could also be audited to determine whether they promote gender stereotypes under a Victorian government plan to address family violence. A teaching aid in the Respectful Relationship program wants pupils to analyse men and women in classics like Cinderella, Snow White, and Rapunzel and compare them to modern stories challenging gender norms. It argues that the traditional fairy tales often serve to reinforce gender norms and to cause a sense of entitlement in boys and lower self-esteem in girls. Citation needed. Children will be encouraged to act as fairy tale detectives to describe and compare the roles commonly given to male and female characters and to identify gendered messages fairy tales give readers. They would then be encouraged to consider what would happen if the characters in fairy tales swapped roles. For example, if the girl were armed with the sword while the boy waited for her to rescue him. Well, I can tell you what would happen. The boy would be waiting forever. Maybe they could just watch Waiting for Godot instead. A Melbourne teacher said the pupils were too young to understand the message. You think? I would rather be teaching them how to read, write and count. We really don't need to crowd out the curriculum with this social engineering. Yeah, considering that Australia keeps slipping down the world rankings in education despite spending ever-increasing amounts on education. Centre for Independent Studies Senior Research Fellow Jennifer Buckingham described the program as objectionable. Firstly, no evidence is provided to show that gender norms are the key contributor to domestic violence, and that this can be fixed by encouraging kids to play with gender-neutral toys, she said. Well, there's no evidence for any of this crap, but that doesn't deter them from giving it their best. Secondly, it's pretty patronising to preschool teachers to think that they have to be trained out of having unconscious gender biases. Exactly. Here's Andrew Bolt and Rowan Dean's take on the issue on the Bolt Report.
Children will be encouraged to act like fairy tale detectives, to identify gendered messages. Children must ask, I guess, why it is the dwarfs who go out to work while Snow White stays at home to do the cleaning, with the animals, of course. So why do they have to read the fairy tales, the children? Why do they have to read them with such a hostile intent? Well, it's because fairy tales allegedly put down women and cause, believe it or not, domestic violence. The Victorian government has declared war on fairy tales, Rowan. It's scrutinising them for gender stereotypes in case they cause domestic violence. You'd support this. I mean, anything must be better than domestic violence.
Well, Andrew, this is quite extraordinary. To buy into this theory, we know that the Victorian government are as mad as they come. In fact, if you go back through fairy tales, you'll find plenty of characters as bonkers as Daniel Andrews in all sorts of ways. So maybe that's why he wants to ban them. But the idea here, if you unravel the tortuous gender equal logic stuff, you get to the point that people who commit domestic violence, so guys who beat up women, or indeed women who beat up guys, or in our Brave New World, guys who beat up guys who happen to be not married but about to be married, or girls who beat up girls who are eating a Magnum and are also going to be married soon. In our Brave New World, Andrew, the reason they beat each other up, if you trawl back through all those years of school and all the rest, you get to the fairy tales they listened to when they were kids and the dolls and the toys they played with when they were kids. So by that same logic, if we're going to ban these things, that would suggest to me that the entire generation, say the pre-war generation who grew up on all these fairy tales, or the post-war generation who grew up on Enid Blyton or the Fabulous Five or whatever they were going to Dorset, all those kids who grew up on all those stories must all have been beating the bejesus out of each other. I don't know how we have survived as a society for hundreds of years since the Grimm fairy tales, or even older, because everybody would be a mad domestic violence person beating each other up. So how did we get to this point? So if you start to ban them, Andrew, let's just accept the crazy Daniel Andrews logic for one moment. But let's also be realistic here. In Australia, the greatest amount of domestic violence, the figures tell us, occurs either in indigenous communities or in ethnic communities and often Islamic communities. So, are we saying they didn't have any of our fairy tales? They had their own fairy tales. The indigenous kids were brought up with the snake, serpent, rainbow guy wandering around. The Islamic kids were brought up with maybe Aladdin and the 40 Thieves. If domestic violence is caused by fairy tales, then surely we have to start banning those fairy tales in those cultures where domestic violence occurs the most.
So I want to finish off by encouraging you to sign the petition started by Baring to stop indoctrinating our youth. Link in the description. So what do you think about the Victorian government's plan to neuter Australian children through their Respectful Relationships program? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.